Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be looking at Leetcode problem number 14, in which we're going to be finding the longest common prefix between a certain number of words. And so it's pretty self-explanatory. They gave a few examples. So if we're given a list of strings called STRs, and we want to find the longest common prefix between all of those words. So in this case, there's an FL in front of all of these words, but then after that, it's not the same letter. So the longest common prefix is FL. If we look in this case, dog, race, car, and car, the first letters don't match up, and so we know that our output is just going to be an empty string because that's technically the longest common prefix. Since there is none, we're just going to return an empty string. And so that's just what we're going to do for, that's the whole point of this question. I have the Google Doc open right here, so we'll get started. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to get our base cases out of the way. And so what I'm going to say is if length of strs is equal to 0, we're just going to return an empty string. And so that's just saying if our list is empty, we're just going to return an empty string. If the length of our strs is equal to 1, we're going to return strs 0. So that's just if we only have one word inside of our strs list, then we're just going to return that first word because that's technically our longest common prefix. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to declare and initialize a variable called common. This variable is going to be the longest common string that the longest common prefix that we have in our words. So we're going to keep updating this string, this common variable, and as many times as we need. And at the very end, we're going to return it to tell us what the longest common prefix is. So that's the whole point of that variable. What I also want to do is I want to be able to loop through all the letters, and so for that, I'm going to need an index. So I'm just going to create a variable called idx for index, and I'm going to initialize it to 0 so that we can loop through from the start of the words, because the first character inside each of these strings, the index of that first character is 0. So that's why we initialize it to 0. And now what we want to do is, one thing we want to make sure is if we look at the str's example over here, the first example, we know that FL is the longest prefix, but what if we were in a situation where we didn't have flower? I mean, if we didn't have flight, what if it was just these two words? In that case, we know that flow is also a prefix to flower, and so we want to make sure that we only loop through. We want to make sure we only loop through enough times so that our index is less than the shortest word in our list, so that we make sure that we don't get an out of bounds error, or that our index is valid for all of the words, which includes the shortest word. And so hopefully that made sense. All I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array, which I'm going to call lengths. And what I'm going to say is there's going to be a one-line for loop. I'm going to say length of s for s in strs. So what this is doing is this is looping through every word. This is looping through flower. This is going to loop through flow. It's going to loop through flight. And what it's going to do, it's going to return the length of that word. So that's what we're doing here. We're looping through every word inside of the list, and we're storing the length of that word. And that's just going to be in the form of an array. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say min length is equal to the min of the lengths. And so that's just going to be getting the minimum length of our words. And so now that we have that, we're going to need a while loop. And the reason we need a while loop is so that we can start looping through each of our words and looking at the letters or characters inside of those strings. And so what I'm going to say is while idx is less than min length, what I'm going to say is I want to first get the letter that I'm comparing. And so in this case, if we were looping through these words, in the first go round, I want to see if there's an F inside of each of these words. And the next go round, I want to see if there's an L inside of each of these words. and the next one I want to see if there's O, and so on until we get to a point where we've reached the end of our shortest word. And so all I'm going to do is, since we're just testing to see if that character exists in every string, so I'm just going to take the first letter, the first word, and I'm going to get the correct letter out of it, or the letter at that index that we're at. And so I think it'll make a little more sense if I write out, I'll say letter is equal to strs 0 idx. So what this is doing is this is getting the letter at the index we're on of the first word. And so all I'm doing is, if we're looking at this list, I'm going to first look at the F, and then I'm going to look at the L, and then I'm going to look at the O, and so on until our index is equal to our minimum length, if it gets to that situation. In this case, I look at the D, look at the O, look at the G, and if we do get to a point where we loop through and we get to the very end, and we loop through and we get to a point where our index is equal to minimum length, we're just going to return our common string. And so that's the point of that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say for word in strs, I'm going to say if word idx is not equal to letter, we're just going to return common. Else, if that doesn't happen, we're going to add to our common variable string. We're going to add that letter, and we're going to increment our idx by 1. So what's happening here is that over here we got the letter that we're looking for, right? So now that we got the letter that we're looking for, we're going to loop through every word inside of strs. So we're going to loop through flower, flow, flight, and we're going to be checking to make sure there's an F inside of those words at the index that we're on. If we get a case where for that word the character at that index is not equal to the letter that we're on, or the letter that we're looking for, we're just going to return the common string, because we know that's the end of the longest prefix, and we can just return whatever the longest prefix is at that point. If we loop through every word, everything is good. We're just going to append, or not append, we're going to add a letter to our common string. We're going to increment our index by 1, and then we're going to go through another iteration of this while loop, and it's going to keep doing this until either we return common over here, or we reach a point where our idx is equal to our min length. So if that does happen, all we want to do is return common. And that should be our whole algorithm for finding the longest common prefix of a list of strings. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to code it up in here and do it as fast as I can. Return, if I can spell return right. If len strs is equal to 1, what do we want? We want common equal to this is equal to an empty string. We want idx is equal to 0, while, before I forget, lengths is equal to length as 4s in. So let me just make sure that this is the same as we coded up here. We have these strs, idx's, we got our lengths. We have our idx, for word, return common, common plus equals letter, and then return common. Okay, so this looks good. I'm going to run it on these two test cases here. I believe those are the ones. So we ran on the first one. Let me copy this over to make sure this runs right. Run code. Okay, And so now I'm just going to hit submit, and let's see if it submits. So it's submitted, and we got our results. This is how we code up the longest common prefix algorithm in Leetcode. Hopefully this was helpful, you guys, and see you guys in the next one. All right, later.